Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. I'm Ross, and I'm live from the HOREB Institute, the historical and objective research and exploration of the Bible, and home of the United Israel World Union Center South. Thank you very much for joining us today for my class on Where is the Lost Sea of the Exodus. We're working through the Pentateuch, going through the annual cycle of readings. We are currently in the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot. This is Torah portion Beishalach. Beishalach. We're going to talk about what that means. We're going to talk about the content of this particular portion, but we're really going to focus on what I consider to be the central element of this particular reading, and here is the description that I've posted, sort of to get you ready. That way you can listen to it and say, I really want to stick around, because I think you will when you hear this. The crossing of the Red Sea is one of the most iconic moments in the Exodus story. But what if the sea's true identity has been lost to history? The Hebrew text doesn't actually say Red Sea, and the name Yam Suf, which is the Hebrew, is applied to at least 3 different bodies of water. So which one, if any of the 3, represents the real crossing site? And by the way, how deep are these waters? And just how big does a miracle need to be a miracle? All right, so here we go. The first thing I want to do is tell you how important, and the reason that I'm focusing on sea, S-E-A, sea, because when I look at this particular Torah portion, when I read through Beishalach, one of the things that I notice is that everywhere you turn, everywhere you read, the sea is all over the place. Let me explain. First of all, the word sea in Hebrew, yam, if you have the these are the words, essential biblical Hebrew vocabularies, you would know that the word sea, yam, is number 89 in terms of frequency in the Hebrew Bible. So I've listed every word, the top 1,000 words, according to their frequency. So yam appears to be the 89th most frequently used word in all the Hebrew Bible. 318 times in the Tanakh, in 267 verses. In the Pentateuch, in the 5 books, we get sea, yom, appears 87 times in 72 verses. All of this is really important. Stick with me on this. In Exodus, 39 times we get the word yom in 28 verses, and in Beishalach, 28 times the word sea appears, basically from Exodus chapter 13, verse 17 to chapter 17, verse 16. So just in about 4 chapters, we see the word yam appears 28 times. So if you're preparing a class for this and you say, I wonder what the theme is in Beishalach. Well, the theme is the sea. We've got to talk about the sea. It is the central part, not only of this Torah portion, one of the most important points in the Exodus story, as we'll see. In fact, this particular Shabbat, according to Jewish tradition on the Jewish calendar, is referred to, it's a special Sabbath, it's called Shabbat Shirah. Shabbat Shirah means the Sabbath of the song. What song, you might ask? I'm glad you asked me that question, because when we talk about Shabbat Shirah, the song of the sea, this particular Torah portion includes something very important, and we're going to get to that. Now, again, the Torah portion, Beishalach, begins in Exodus chapter 13 and verse 17. This is really the beginning of the Exodus, the departure. The book of Exodus, we're into quite a bit already, but it's the Exodus, the departure of the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, about which the whole story is really focused on. That begins here. That begins now. We've got to truly focus on the narrative from this point forward, because what we're going to see is the story takes on a whole new character, a whole new nature, and I'm excited to get into it. As the ASV translates the Hebrew of Exodus 13:17, we're going to go to a lot of verses today, but I'm just giving you this off my notes here. It says, when Pharaoh had let the people go, when Pharaoh had let the people go. So that's where we get the name Beshalach, because the translation, let go, is a word that we encounter often in the book of Exodus. I've told you in previous classes that when Moses goes before Pharaoh, Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh, I don't read that as a request. I know others do, and that's why we get let my people go, like a jussive, like he's asking for permission. What we really get in the Hebrew, at least my reading of it, is more of a forceful. Shalakatami means send forth my people. Send forth. Shalak is to send forth. A shaliach is one who is sent forth. So when we say shalakatami, send forth my people. This is not so much a kind request. Someone messaged me and said, yeah, but you have the word na used in the Hebrew in some of these verses where it's associated with send forth my people. So it doesn't mean that Moses has to be rude. He can say, send forth my people, please. And the message is the same. But anyway, we're going to get into that a little bit more. But we got shalakatami, and Beshalach really indicates when Pharaoh sent forth the people. And we're going to see that this is not just, okay, you can go. He is pushed into a position where, according to the writers, according to the narrative flow, he has no choice but to send them out. In fact, we're going to even read later that he chases the children of Israel out. So with this letting go, with the letting go by Pharaoh of the children of Israel, we enter a new phase in the sacred history of Israel. Notice I'm referring to it as the sacred history. We can talk about academic understanding of the text, but what I really want to get at is this is the core of the revelation, not only in the Pentateuch, but throughout the Hebrew Bible. We begin with this class, with this reading, what I refer to as the wilderness itineraries. Because once the children of Israel leave Egypt proper, you're going to see almost immediately that they go into a wilderness. Now, we're going to have several wildernesses, areas, geographical regions, and we are fairly certain sort of the broad locations of these wildernesses. The only time people get confused on where these wildernesses are is when they decide they want to put their HOREB or Sinai in another place. And then they avoid certain text, maybe not intentionally, although I think some do, but just because you have to make it fit. So people will move entire wildernesses to make a point, and we're going to see some of that become very obvious. But the wilderness itinerary begins when the journey begins from Egypt to the land of promise. Now, some of you are familiar with this researcher, this scholar, because I've referenced her work. I believe that Deborah Hearn, my current understanding, is that Deborah Hearn is probably the world's authority on this topic. Her research is posted as a link. Her academia page is posted as a link in the description of this video. I highly recommend that you jump headfirst, safely of course, into Deborah Hearn's research. She got her doctorate on the wilderness itinerary. So, I mean, this is her whole life for more than 2 decades. So I highly recommend. Okay, so when we begin our Torah portion in chapter 13, verse 17, we're really reporting on a previous text. So what I'd like you to do is go with me this morning to a passage in chapter 12 of Exodus, Exodus chapter 12, verse 37 through 41. Exodus chapter 12, verse 37 through 41. That's on page 72 if you have the Torah tablet, page 72. And I'm going to read from 37. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkot, about 600,000 on foot that were men besides children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough, which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victuals. That's my word of the day, victuals. Put that down, write it down, look it up. Now the time that the children of Israel dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, even the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the host of Jehovah went out from the land of Egypt, went out. Now, where it says thrust out, this particular passage in the Hebrew, the word is a word that literally means to chase. So it's they requested, send forth my people over and over and over and over until finally Beshalach, Pharaoh let go. But it's not just, all right, you guys, they chased them out. Now, they're going to be in the wilderness. We're going to see in the next several minutes, we're going to see that they go from their place, according to the text in the Nile Delta, into a wilderness as soon as they leave the place in which they dwell. Now, later writers in the Bible also find this departure, this exodus, to be the key to the redemption of the sacred history, the sacred writers. And I want us to look together at Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 34. Go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 34. And as soon as I get an English translation pulled up, here we go. This is specifically referring to the departure. Hath God essayed to go and take him a nation from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand, and by an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, according to all that Jehovah your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? Again, I read from the ASV because this is what we're using for the Torah tablets. It's very literal. So this is referring to, it's questioning the reader, the listener. Has anything like this ever happened? Has a God rescued a people from another nation? Now, I want to look at verse 35 through 37. Unto thee it was showed that thou mightest know that Jehovah, he is God, there is none else beside him. Out of heaven he made thee to hear his voice, that he might instruct thee, and upon earth he made thee to see his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of fire. We're getting a little bit ahead because this is talking already about a revelation at HOREB, but hang with me. Verse 37, and because he loved thy fathers, therefore he chose their seed after them and brought thee out with his presence, with his great power out of Egypt. So the Exodus is the thing that is in this particular text in one place called this great thing, all right? Now, the interesting point that I want to get to is that when I say later writers referred back on this, most religious fundamentalists will read this as Moses writing. It's part of his speech. It's considered to be part of his speech. But as I do in all of my classes, I want to be very honest with the text. I want to be honest to Moses, honest to God. This text is written later. Listen to this, verse 38. He brought thee out, okay, in verse 38, to drive out nations from before thee, greater and mightier than thou, to bring thee in, to give thee their land for an inheritance, as it is this day. Know therefore this day, and lay it to thy heart, that Jehovah, he is God in heaven above and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. and you shall keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee this day, that it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days in the land which Jehovah your God gives you forever. Now, a lot of people would read right over that and not notice the very nuance, the very subtlety in which this writer lets us know that they've already, at the time of this writing, don't know when, have already driven out nations. Right? Some might read this as he brought you out and he's going to do this. But notice the phrase, as it is this day. In other words, you've already taken possession. So this is a later writer, but the point I'm making is just to bring up the very important point that later writers do look back on this rescue from Egypt, the taking the people of Israel out of Egypt as the key, right? So now, here we go. Let's see. Now, let me look at the next. Here we go. Throughout Scripture, throughout all the Scripture, not just the Pentateuch, there are elements of the Exodus story, and one such element is the great escape through the sea. What I'm going to show you today is not only is this an element, but it is the central element of the rescue. Remember, now that's saying a lot, because if you read the narrative in Exodus, say from 7 to 12, you're going to see the blows, the plagues. You see that also mentioned in various other texts in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the Psalms, and we've covered that in previous classes. But it's this going to and through the sea as one of the first steps in the Exodus. It's this piece that holds the central place in the miraculous rescue of God's people. We even have a song to commemorate it, and that's in Exodus chapter 15. But what I want to do, and this is a pretty much one of the longer sections of text that I've read in a class, so bear with me, but I want to read together with you Exodus chapter 14. We're going to read all of Exodus chapter 14, and that begins on page 80 of your Torah tablet. So Exodus 14, very important because we're going to base what we talk about today on this chapter. Here we go. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn back and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal-Zephon, over against it shall ye encamp by the sea. And Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he shall follow after them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and upon all his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Jehovah. And they did so. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people were fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was changed towards the people. And they said, What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot, took his people with him, and he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt, captains over all of them, and Jehovah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he pursued after the children of Israel, for the children of Israel went out with a high hand. And the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them encamping by the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-Zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they were sore afraid. The children of Israel cried out unto Jehovah. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt with us to bring us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we spake unto thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it were better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of Jehovah, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have known, you have seen today, you shall see them again no more forever. Jehovah will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Verse 15, And Jehovah said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. Lift thou up thy rod and stretch out thy hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go into the midst of the sea on dry ground. And behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall go in after them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, upon the chariots and the horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Jehovah, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the angel of God went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud removed from them and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud and the darkness, yet gave it light by night, and one came not near the other all the night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And Jehovah caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all the night, and made the sea dry land. Very important details here. And the waters were divided, and the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen. And it came to pass in the morning watch that Jehovah looked forth from the host of the Egyptians upon the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of cloud, and discomfited the host of the Egyptians. And he took off their chariot wheels, and they drove them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for Jehovah fighteth for them against the Egyptians. A little bit more. Stay with me. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Stretch out thy hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, on their chariots and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And Jehovah overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even all the host of Pharaoh that went in after them into the sea. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus Jehovah saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. Important point there. If you have a Torah tablet, I'd just make a note there. And Israel saw the great work which Jehovah did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared Jehovah, and they believed in Jehovah and in his servant Moses. And the people said, Amen. We have some questions. We have to dig into this because we have read this story, which is a fantastic story, one of the key stories in all of biblical literature. Everything goes back to these events. But we have questions. What body of water are we talking about? All right, we're gonna have to look at what sea is it, and what wilderness are we talking about? When Pharaoh says, "Look, the wilderness has them boxed in," what wilderness are we talking about? These points matter because it's going to give us clues as to where everything is the whole rest of the story. How long have the children of Israel been gone from their place of residence? Now, again, if we read the text as a fundamentalist and we say 600,000, or as it's used in several pieces of priestly literature, 603,550 men, and then you add onto that women and children, we're looking at about 2.73 million people, about the same size as Chicago, maybe a little bit close to what we see in Houston. If you're an Australian, it would be like Brisbane. In other words, that many people left, and you have to think about what that looks like, how far across, how many rows of people, and it's a massive migration. How far have they traveled since they left when they arrive at the sea? Does the text give us any of that? So the only way that we can come to a better understanding some of these questions, what we have to do is we have to look at other texts in the Bible that may help us answer some of these questions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through quite a few texts in the Hebrew Bible to get at maybe some more information that helps us fill in the gaps on the story that we read in Exodus 14. So now I've been talking about the Song of the Sea. We're not going to read the Song of the Sea together in its entirety, but I do want us to look at Exodus 15, verses 4 through 10. That's on page 88 of the Torah tablet. Verse 4 through 10. Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea, and his chosen captains are sunk in the Red Sea. English, this is ASV. The deep covers them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Thy right hand, O Jehovah, is glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Jehovah, dasheth in pieces the enemy, and in the greatness of thine excellency thou overthrowest them that rise up against thee. Thou sendest forth thy wrath, it consumeth them as stubble, and with the blast of thy nostrils the waters were piled up. The floods stood upright as a heap. The deeps were congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy. Thou didst blow with thy wind, the sea covered them, and they sank as lead in the mighty waters. Now, I know some of you ladies are up with your tambourines right now, singing with Sister Miriam, but it's time to take your seats once again. This is an image that the sacred writer wants us to see. It's poetry, it's a song considered by many of the great biblical scholars to be some of the earliest material that we have of all biblical literature. Frank Moore Cross, some of these guys, they put David Noel Friedman, they put this as the earliest literature that we have. So did we learn anything there? Again, put your notes in the area for your notes, because we're going to bring all of this together, try to determine which body of water we're talking about. And then, by the way, for those of you who don't know this, after this class, we're going to go to a discussion where you get to bring up counter arguments and your views. And but at this point, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 11. Deuteronomy chapter 11 and beginning in verse 2. Deuteronomy 11 and beginning in verse 2. We're going to just read a couple of verses here. And it says, And know ye this day, for I speak not with your children that have not known, and that have not seen the chastisement of Jehovah your God, his greatness, his mighty hand, and his outstretched arm, and his signs and his works which he did in the midst of Egypt unto Pharaoh the king of Egypt, and unto all his land, and what he did unto the army of Egypt, unto their horses and to their chariots, how he made the water of the Red Sea to overflow them as they pursued after you, and how Jehovah hath destroyed them to this day. All right. So, again, if you just take it at face value, this is according to the narrative. This is later. They're obviously, with Moses is giving his speech about this time of year, by the way, according to Deuteronomy chapter 1. And they're on, at the time the speech is given, they're on the east side of the Jordan, preparing to enter the land. But he's reminding them, according to the sacred writers, of what God did to the army at Egypt. Notice just a couple of key points. He made the water of the Red Sea, I'm using a corrected translation, to overflow them. Overflow them. I encourage people to look at that. What does that mean in the Hebrew? All right. Now look at Joshua. We're going to go to Joshua chapter 2. We're just going to pick up one verse here, chapter 2, verse 10. And by the way, this is a woman who is talking to certain spies, and she says the following: For we have heard how Jehovah dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did unto the two kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, unto Sihon and to Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. This would be a perfect opportunity for somebody to say, dried up the waters. Hey, dried up the waters? That's the way you describe the... Okay, but anyway, so it's interesting. The phrase there, dried up the waters. Stick with me. Now let's go to the Psalms. Let's go to Psalm 77, Psalm 77, beginning in verse 19. I have several passages from the Psalm. Now, by the way, in the Hebrew Bible, this is verse 20 and 21, but in English, it's going to be 19 and 20. Thy way was in the sea, and thy paths in the great waters, and thy footsteps were not known. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Look down at verse, let's look at chapter 78, verses 12 and 13. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zon. He clave the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as a heap. Very interesting. We're talking about Zoan. Where is Zoan? So this is going to help us. If the cleaving of the sea is around Zoan, as far as this sacred writer is concerned, then maybe that helps us some. Maybe it helps us to identify which body of water. Now, look down at verse 43 in 78. Psalm 78, 43 says the following. How he set his signs in Egypt and his wonders in the field of Zoan. Again, the fields of Zoan. Now, these are clues. Look with me now at Psalm 106. Psalm 106 and verse 7. Our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They remembered not the multitude of thy loving kindness, not kindnesses, I should say, but were rebellious at the sea, even at the Red Sea. Nevertheless, he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make his mighty power to be known. He rebuked the Red Sea also, and it was dried up. So he led them through the depths as through a wilderness, and he saved them from the hand of him that hated them and redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. And the waters covered their adversaries. There was not one of them left. They believed, then believed they his words, and they sang his praise. And the congregation said, hallelujah. Look at Psalm 136. Again, I've got to go through quite a few of these texts. We're going to pull this all together soon. Psalm 136, beginning in 13. And by the way, this is sort of a, every time there is a great statement of God's greatness, it's followed by, for his loving kindness endures forever. So you can all say that from your home as I wrap up verse 14. 13, here we go. To him that divided the Red Sea in sunder, for his loving kindness endures forever. If you weren't ready that time, do it this time. And made Israel to pass through the midst of it, for his loving kindness endureth forever. But overthrew Pharaoh and his host in the Red Sea, for his loving kindness endureth forever. So what we get is these writers, the psalmists, they are recalling this great miracle where God dried up the water, caused Israel to pass through the sea, and then the enemies were destroyed by the waters. Now, I want to look at a couple other passages. It's not just in these poetic texts in the Psalms and, and in the early writings. Let's look also at Isaiah. I'm going to give you a couple of prophetic texts, not all, but just a few for your notes. Isaiah chapter 19 and verse 11 says this. The princes of Zoan, there's our word again. Where is Zoan? Are utterly foolish. The counsel of the wisest counselors of Pharaoh has become brutish. How say ye unto Pharaoh, I am the son of the wise, the son of ancient kings? Look down at verse 13. The princes of Zoan are become fools. The princes of Memphis are deceived. They've caused Egypt to go astray, that are the cornerstone of her tribes. If you had to guess, like right now, where would you think that Zoan is? Is it in Egypt proper, or is it elsewhere? Now, I know that a lot of people, in their mind, you're looking at a modern map of Egypt, and you have the big Sinai Delta, and you go, all of that is ancient Egypt, but it's not, okay? So, but in your mind, I want people to look at. Now, some of these locations are debated. You know, I wish that I did upload, by the way, a couple of maps on our Discord channel for those of you who are interested. I made in our dialogue section a discussion. It shows some of these maps. And I just made general notations on one of the maps, just to give you an idea where these locations are believed to be. But what I want to make the point of is that this location, that Zoan, is in Egypt proper, right? It's not elsewhere. It's not outside of ancient Egypt. Okay, let's look at, while we're in Isaiah, let's just go to another passage, Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 4. For their princes are at Zoan, and their ambassadors are come to Chanes. Again, these are Egyptian locations. I'm not going to go to Ezekiel 30 and verse 14. It's on the screen. You can see it. Put it in your notes. Look at it later. But all of these are confirming a location. I wanted some of these these texts to indicate geographically where we're at in the narrative at the parting of the sea. Now, I do want to get bring a later writer in. No one argues that Nehemiah is a later writer. Look with me at Nehemiah chapter 9, and let's read verse 9 through 11. And thou sawest the affliction of our fathers in Egypt, and heardest their cry by the Red Sea, and showeth signs and wonders upon Pharaoh and on all his servants and on all the people of his land. For thou knewest that they dealt proudly against them, and didst get thee a name as it is this day. And you did divide the sea before them, so that they went through the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and their pursuers thou didst cast into the depths as a stone into the mighty waters. Now, again, the point is, according to these last few texts particularly, the children of Israel are in and near ancient Egypt, right? They've not made, you can read the narrative and you're not going to see a long extended trek through the wilderness regions prior to the going through the sea. The miracle at the sea happens early in the narrative, and we're going to make a few more points as we go through this. Look with me we're going to go back to Exodus 14. I know we read the whole chapter. I promise you, I'm not going to do that to you again. What I am going to do, though, is go back to Exodus 14, and let's read the first couple of verses. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn back and encamp before Pi Hahirot, between Migdal and the sea, before Baal Zephon, over against it ye encamp by the sea. So this is like as soon as they leave, right? 12 is, we read in 12:37 through 41, it's actually like the departure. And then 13 is a regulation on a certain legal code that we can talk about more probably in the discussion afterwards. And then 14 is this text that we're dealing with. So when they leave, he tells them, this is where I want you to go. This is where I want you to encamp. And we get several locations. Now, some scholars say this is like a map of Narnia. They don't even know where these places are. Some would argue that this is a mystical, made-up geography, that it doesn't fit any map. but it's later. People have made this up. Well, I'm giving the benefit. I'm trying to look at this and say, do we have indication within the biblical text that some of these locations are real? And the answer to that is yes, I believe that we do. Now, another location, so I'm putting Zoan in Egypt proper, and what I'd also like to look at is a place called Migdal, because in chapter 14, he wants them to go and camp before Pi Hahirot, between Migdal and the sea. So if you could find Migdal, let's say you can't find Pi Hahirot, but you could find Migdal. Is it in Egypt or is it somewhere else? Well, let's look at the few texts that I've identified here. The first thing I'd like to look at is in the book of Numbers, chapter 33, beginning in verse 6. And by the way, Numbers chapter 33 is one of the 7 references. Remember, we have 7 references in the Hebrew Bible to Moses writing something, all third person. This is one of them, and it says that Moses recorded sort of an itinerary of the journeys of the children of Israel. So here's what it says, beginning in verse 6. Or verse 5, I guess, in English. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses and encamped in Sukkot, and they journeyed from Sukkot and encamped in Etam, which is in the edge of the wilderness. Your question should be, what wilderness, right? And they journeyed from Etam and turned back unto Pi Hahirot, which is before Baal Zephon, and they encamped before Migdal. Verse 8. They journeyed from before Hahirot and passed through the midst of the sea into the wilderness, and they went 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etam and encamped in Marah. And they journeyed from Marah and came to Elim, and in Elim there are 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. That's 70, by the way. And they encamped there. All right, verse 10, and they journeyed from Elim, and they encamped by the Red Sea, and they journeyed from the Red Sea and encamped in the wilderness of Sin. Now, let me ask you something. Did you notice something that talks about they camped at Migdal, and then they crossed through the sea, and it tells that they go into the wilderness, so there's another wilderness, and then the next thing you know, they're camping at the sea. Now, the question is, did they go through the sea, they go into the wilderness, and did they encounter another sea? Which direction are they headed? See, this is part of the trick of paying attention and looking at maps while we study the Bible. If the body of water, which I'm going to kind of drop a hint here, and I'm going to come back to it, if the body of water called Yam, a collection of waters is what the word means, if that body of water is in that northeast region of the Nile Delta, if that's called Yam Suf, a sea of reeds, if they cross through that, and then if they come out into what is known as the wilderness of Shur, and then they start going southward, they're going to run into, guess what? Another body of water called Yam Suf. All right. So, but it's a different body of water. Now, but let me get back on Migdal, and we'll come back to that. So let's look at a couple more verses in Jeremiah. Let's look at Jeremiah chapter 44 and verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the Jews that dwelt in the land of Egypt, that dwelt at Migdal, at Tachpanhes, and at Memphis, and in the country of Pathros. So this is, again, confirming that Migdal is in Egypt proper. Let's look at Jeremiah 46 and verse 14. Declare ye in Egypt, and publish in Migdal, and publish in Memphis, and in Tachpanhes, say ye, stand forth and prepare thee, for the sword hath devoured round about thee. Let me look at an Ezekiel chapter 29. I don't want Ezekiel to feel offended that I didn't read the last passage. Ezekiel 29 and verse 10. Therefore, behold, I am against thee, and against thy rivers, and I will make the land of Egypt an utter waste and desolation from the tower of Sevene even unto the tower of Ethiopia. Let's see. Let's see if I wrote down. See there, I wrote down the wrong verse. Look at chapter 30, verse 6. Ezekiel chapter 30 and verse 6. Let me look at the Hebrew here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, from Migdal. Okay, so it's translating. I didn't get the wrong verse. Chapter 29 and verse 10 and chapter 30 and verse 6 both give a translation rather than a transliteration. So verse 30, chapter 30, verse 6, thus says Jehovah, they also that uphold Egypt shall fall, and the pride of her power shall come down. Here it says from the tower of Sevene. In Hebrew, it's from Migdal, right? Tower is Migdal. They shall fall in it by the sword, saith the Lord Jehovah. So Migdal is a location in Egypt, as is Zoan, these locations that we're looking for at the sea. Now, one of the things that happens is when they cross through the sea, they enter a certain wilderness. And if we know where that wilderness is, we can identify more likely the location of the sea through which the children of Israel pass. Is it this Nile Delta region, which I'm going to suggest that it is? Is it the Gulf of Suez, or is it the Gulf of Aqaba, which is far more popular among fundamentalists because they like that sea better, and we're going to talk about why. But let's look at a couple of texts that deal with the wilderness of Shur. Look with me at Exodus 15, by the way, verse 22. By the way, this is part of the song. And Moses led Israel onward from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Okay, so they cross through the sea, and they go into a wilderness known as the wilderness of Shur. Now, we know where the wilderness of Shur is. It's east of Egypt proper, that Nile Delta region, and it's not where some people put it on their map to make another body of water work, and I'm going to prove that. Look with me at 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel, let's look at chapter 27 and verse 8. 1 Samuel 27, 8. And David and his men went up and made a raid upon the Geshurites and the Girzites and the Amalekites, for those nations were the inhabitants of the land, who were of old, as thou goest to Shur, even unto the land of Egypt. So what this is talking about is, if you're on the way to Shur, the wilderness of Shur, from Canaan, from Israel proper, from the kingdom of Judea, you're going to head along that coastal region that banks against, that borders the Mediterranean. That's the region of Shur. You've seen it on maps all over recently because it's that region that is also associated with the Gaza Strip in that region, okay? So it says, as you're going towards Egypt and you come to Shur, see, so I want to put Shur in that area, right outside that eastern side of the Nile Delta. Look with me now at 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 7. And let's see, it says, and Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah as thou goest to Shur, that is before Egypt. All right, so it's right on the face. In Hebrew, it's al pnei Mitzrayim, right on the face of Egypt. If you're going to Shur, you're like, hey, where is Shur? So I encourage you, because I'm not going to go into all of these texts, do a little bit of study on the way of Shur in the Bible. It's generally in English spelled S-H-U-R. It's east of Egypt, and it puts us, if we're going to look at which body of water most likely matches where the children of Israel crossed through in the miraculous parting of the sea, where would it be? It's east of the Nile Delta because you go right into the wilderness of Shur. The only way to make that not work is to move the wilderness of Shur. And are you sure you want to do that? Sorry, I had to do that. All right, look at Exodus chapter 10. Exodus chapter 10, and I want to look at verse 19. By the way, this is the first occurrence, that's page 58 in the Torah tablet. This is the first mention of the Red Sea. And Jehovah turned an exceeding strong wind, which took up the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the border of Egypt. So a west wind, in order for a west wind to blow the locusts into the sea, if the children of Israel are in the Nile Delta, it didn't blow them. It's not talking about the Gulf of Suez, because that would need to be a south wind, right? It's not talking about the Gulf of Aqaba, because it is going to be an easterly direction, but that is a long way to blow some locusts. Now, I'm not saying that God can't blow a locust that far. I'm saying that it doesn't seem to make sense that it's referring to a body of water that is that far from the place where we have an infestation of locusts. So when I look at these texts, I'm thinking, okay, there is an indication that the first body of water that the children of Israel are going to encounter. Now, this is going to look a lot different in modern times than it does in ancient times. There are actual geological studies that have shown this. But I will say this, if you're going to look at this study, it makes more sense to put that initial leg, that first body of water that you're going to encounter, right east of the Nile Delta region. Now, the one thing that I want to look at now is, how is it that someone would want to put the Sea of Reeds at the Gulf of Aqaba? Is that even possible biblically? It is. It is. What I'm going to do is share with you a text that clearly identifies the Gulf of Aqaba with the phrase in Hebrew, Yam Suf. Yam Suf means Sea of Reeds. Okay, in Hebrew, it's referred to in that way too. So go with me to 1 Kings chapter 9 and verse 26. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is Elliott, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. Okay, so we get some geographical points that date to the monarchical period, where it mentions Ezion-Geber, Elliott. Some of you who've been to Israel with me have been to those locations, or a lot of these locations. But I'm thinking in particular of people sitting in the room with me who actually like Elliott quite a bit. But you go to Elliott, and this is the area where it's talking about, where it says that he made a navy of ships right there on the shore of Yam Suf. So people love this text. By the way, in your notes, I'm not going to go to these, but in your notes, Deuteronomy 2:1, maybe Judges chapter 11, verse 16, perhaps these two references. There could be a couple more that refer to what we call the Gulf of Aqaba as Yam Suf. So there are texts in the Bible which seem to push that as the location known as Yam Suf. But the question becomes, which makes more sense in terms of the story to be the crossing of the children of Israel when they leave? Well, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about which body of water referred to as Yam Suf makes the most sense. So I'm going to look at a couple of points, and this is going to give us an idea to maybe discuss further in the discussion afterwards. So you get a say too, just not yet. So most of the evidence from the text, I'm a text guy. I'm not impressed by snazzy videos or good CGI. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like sitting down with a tub of popcorn and watching a good movie. My point is, I can see through when someone is making a CGI and wowing me. It doesn't impress me if it can't be supported by the text, okay? What I see in the text is that the body of water directly east of the Nile Delta, where according to the sacred writers, we have the children of Israel, they've got to pass through this region. They have to. So how do they do it? And by the way, according to the narrative, as I read it, this happens, the crossing of the sea happens pretty soon into this first leg of the journey. But I'll tell you why most people don't like that solution. You say, why is that? I'm glad you asked. Because it doesn't meet our expectations. It's not big enough. It's not deep enough. We want our miracles big, big, big. Impossibly big. So, what are the preferred choices? Most people don't like this Nile Delta area. They want a couple of other options. So here are your other options. Here's one, the Gulf of Suez. Now, if you look at a map, and again, I've uploaded a couple of maps on the Discord, but you can just Google, or if you have a good study Bible, I can't tell you how many times I've recommended the New Oxford Annotated Bible with Apocrypha. It's on my website, rossknichols.com. You can go there and click it. I mean, I'm not a salesman for them. I'm just saying it's a great overall academic study Bible. And there are maps, and you'll see that Nile Delta region shaped like this. On the left, on the west, you have the Red Sea is below, and it splits into two arms. The western side is called the Gulf of Suez. The eastern arm of that body of water is called the Gulf of Aqaba. Let's talk a little bit about the size of those bodies of water, because that makes the miracle much bigger. The average width of the Gulf of Suez is 30 kilometers, 19 miles, okay? So it's a big body of water, 19 miles roughly. The average depth is 40 meters. The average depth is 140 feet, 40 meters, right? And that's pretty big, because you can imagine 140 feet of water on either side. Now, how far it's got to open up to let 3 million people through, I don't know. Now, some have proposed where it says that the children of Israel went out armed. The Hebrew word there is chamishim, which means 50. So I don't think it means armed like they're armed like soldiers. I know a lot of people like that image, but that's not what it means. It could mean that they went out in 50s, like if you stretch them roughly. It's not like they lined up in battle formation, but it's generally indicating that that's about the width. So if you imagine that width of people, not right up on one another, but they're crossing through a body of water that is 140 feet tall, that's going to be scary. It says that the water is congealed, like you could poke your hand. That was the sound of pushing into Jell-O. You push your hand into the wall. That's what they're indicating in some of these texts, okay? Now, the maximum depth of the Gulf of Suez is 80 meters or 260 feet deep. Again, this is to be preferred by many over the Nile Delta region because it makes the miracle big. Now, the Gulf of Aqaba, the average width, that's the eastern arm. This is the favorite. Everybody, not everybody, but many people, primarily fundamentalists who like certain videos that are CGI and really done well. I love them. But they really like this one because this is a big miracle, big, big, big. And that's the Gulf of Aqaba. The average width is 24 kilometers, about 15 miles. The average depth, get ready, is 800 meters. The average depth is 800 meters. That's 2,600 feet. That's half a mile. That's half a mile, okay? The maximum depth is 1,850 meters. That's 6,070 feet. Now, I know you're saying, but Ross doesn't know about Nueva. There is a popular theory that the region out of Nueva, by the way, if you go on the Tanakh tours with Jono and I this coming November, God willing, if everything is peaceful and we can do it, we're going to bring you to Nueva. We're going to be in Egypt. But at this point, there are some who said there's a land bridge under the water. And it's made popular on some really cool movies. Now, I've done a lot of research on this, and I don't see that land bridge makes it a whole lot better. But in places, according to some sites that I've looked at, and I've not studied official depth charts yet, but I am. It's on my list, says that even that land bridge is approximately 800 to 1,000 feet deep, 240 to 300 meters. Now, the first thing, if you want your miracle that big and you say, I don't care what Ross says, they didn't walk through puddles, they walked through a big, deep ocean. If that's your view, I just want you to say, okay, I'm okay, believe what you want to believe. But I want you to think about how scary that would be. Maybe it's just me, but I'm talking about 200 meters of water on either side. Okay. Again, the Nile Delta region is just dismissed by most because it's just, quite honestly, it's too puny. Some people would say, what's the miracle there? And how many chariots can you drown in, this little marshy area? Okay. First thing I want to do is say, can it even be a miracle that the children of Israel walk across something that's not quite as deep as the Gulf of Suez or the Gulf of Aqaba? Well, according to the biblical writers, according to sacred history, it's very much a miracle. If you'll go with me to the book of Joshua, I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's read Joshua chapter 3. Joshua 3, and I want to go to verse 9 first. Joshua said unto the children of Israel, come hither and hear the words of Jehovah your God. And Joshua said, hereby you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, the Jebusite. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passeth before you into the Jordan. Now, therefore, take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, for every tribe a man, and it will come to pass, when the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the covenant, the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, even the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand in one heap. Interesting, the language there. And it came to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over the Jordan, the priests that bear the ark of the covenant being before the people, and when they that bear the ark were come unto the Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks all the time of harvest, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up in one heap a great way off at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. And those that went down into the sea of the Arava, even the salt sea, called, by the way, today we call it the Dead Sea, but that's not biblical. Call biblical things by biblical names. Start calling the Dead Sea the Salt Sea. Were wholly cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of Jehovah stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all the people passed over on dry ground until all the nation were passed over, clean over the Jordan. That's not a very good miracle, is it? Of course it is. Yes, it's a good miracle. Go to chapter 4 and verse 19, Joshua chapter 4 and verse 19. And the people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and encamped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan did Joshua set up in Gilgal. And he spake unto the children of Israel, saying, when your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel came over this Jordan on dry land. For Jehovah your God dried up the waters. That's an interesting way to put it. Of the Jordan from before you until you were passed over, as Jehovah your God did at the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were passed over, that all the people of the earth may know the hand of Jehovah, that it's mighty, that you may fear Jehovah your God forever. In this particular text, I find fascinating because there is a comparison by the priestly sacred writer to compare the miracle at the Jordan, the waters being dried up at the Jordan. Notice how they stood up in a heap. They were pushed back, cut off from Adam, where the water flows south, to the Dead Sea, wide enough, an area, so that the children of Israel not only crossed through on dry land, sounds familiar, but there's heap of water, right? And by the way, if you go to Israel with me, I'll bring you straight up to that water, and we'll even go to this particular place where we believe that the children of Israel crossed into the land. We'll be on both sides if you go with me to Jordan and Israel, but that'd be your choice. But anyway, you'll see these locations. But the miracle of stopping the water is considered by the sacred priestly writers to be quite fantastic. Whether we're talking about the Red Sea, Yam Suf, or we're talking about the Jordan River, we're talking about a miracle here. Now, I'm not going to be the one to say that that's not big enough to satisfy my miracle desires. I'm going to say, well, maybe one is like the other. Now, I might not know which body of water represents Yam Suf, but I know what the Jordan looks like, and I can even tell about how deep it was at a better time. Okay, let me look at a couple more texts. Let's go through a couple of Psalms. Let's go to Psalm 66 and verse 6. He turned the sea into dry land. They went through the river on foot. There did we rejoice in him. This particular passage, again, this idea of causing what was water, wet, to be dry. Look at Psalm 114. Here, I'm going to read all of this psalm. It's a short psalm. It's only 8 verses. When Israel went out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange language, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The sea saw it and fled. You think the sea really saw it and fled, or is that poetic language? The Jordan was driven back. Interesting. The sea saw it and fled. The Jordan was driven back. It's comparing the sea and the river similarly. The mountains skipped like rams. Poetic, by the way. The little hills like lambs. What aileth thee, O thou sea, that thou fleest, thou Jordan, that thou turnest back? Ye mountains, that ye skip like rams, ye little hills like lambs. Tremble, thou earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flint into a fountain of waters. Now, this miraculous parting of water happens not once at the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, not twice at the exit and the entrance of the children of Israel under Joshua into the promised land, but at least 3 times. Go with me to 2 Kings chapter 2. Now again, you have to decide if these miracles are big enough for your taste. 2 Kings chapter 2, beginning in verse 6. And Elijah said unto him, Tarry here, I pray thee, for Jehovah hath sent me to the Jordan. And he said, As Jehovah liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And they too went on. And 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood over against him far off. If you're going to stand against Elijah and Elisha, you should stand afar off, by the way. And 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood against them far off, and they too stood by the Jordan. And Elijah took his mantle, wrapped it together, and smote the waters, and they were divided hither and thither. That means here and there, so that they too went over on dry ground. All right. Now look down at verse 13. Let me read verse 12. And Elisha saw it, and he cried. This is when he sees Elijah taken off. He saw it and cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and the horsemen thereof, and he saw him no more. He took hold of his own clothes and rent them in two pieces. And he took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood by the bank of the Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and smote the waters and said, where is Jehovah, the God of Elijah? And when he also had smitten the waters, they were divided hither and thither, and Elisha went over. All right. Now, this reading, this Parsha, Beshalach, presents some challenges, I'll admit. The debate as to which sea is the lost sea of the Exodus continues. Some of you are going to prefer the Gulf of Suez. Some of you are going to prefer the Gulf of Aqaba. And that's partly because, if I might say, I have yet to produce a snazzy video with good CGI effects to convince you otherwise, because that is a good movie. So a lot of our theology, unfortunately, is based not so much on the evidence of the text, but on something that we've seen that is not according to what the text suggests. I would say that if you choose to really want to keep this Gulf of Aqaba, then let's force people to represent the depth of that crossing the way it really should look, and see how it looks, and see if that really makes sense. But either way, the debate is going to continue. We're going to take some of this debate into an after-class discussion. Look, we have inherited the story in multiple forms by different authors writing in different times and places, and at times, these later authors have updated our text. And so, if someone is relying on a text and saying, this text goes all the way back to the first people that saw the sea, and so we know, well, is that the case? Or can we look at these texts and see that they have anachronistic insertions? And that means something which is written at a later time that stands out obviously. And I'm going to say that that is the case. Let me give you three. I'm going to give you three anachronisms in Deuteronomy 4. We read that one earlier, so I'm not going to read that one, but you see it on the screen in front of you. Write that in your notes, Deuteronomy 4, 38 and 40. Let's look at Exodus chapter 15, which is on page 90 in your Torah tablet. And this is, by the way, the Song of the Sea. Now, again, if the Song of the Sea represents exactly what Miriam read from the songbook, then that's one thing. But I'm going to show you, I think I can convince you, that at least part of this has been edited later. And how can I do that? Well, let's look. Exodus 15, beginning in verse 13, page 90. Thou in thy loving kindness hast led the people that thou hast redeemed. Thou hast guided them in thy strength to thy holy habitation. The people have heard, they tremble. Pangs have taken hold on the inhabitants of Philistia. Then were the chiefs of Edom dismayed, the mighty men of Moab. Trembling taketh hold of them. All the inhabitants of Canaan are melted away. Terror and dread falls upon them by the greatness of thine arm. They are as still as a stone, till thy people pass over, O Jehovah, till the people pass over that thou hast purchased. You will bring them in and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, the place, O Jehovah, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in, the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established. Jehovah shall reign forever and ever. And then it goes into quoting about the horses of Pharaoh being cast into the sea. Some of you know that song, I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, horse and the rider thrown into the sea. But right in the midst of that story is a section which describes the inhabitants of the land of Canaan quaking at the children of Israel as they pass over, and it mentions this sanctuary which does not exist at the time. This is one piece of evidence. You can accept it or try to interpret it another way. We'll talk about that maybe in the discussion period. Now look at Exodus 16, which is in this same area, page 100, and let's see if there is an anachronism here. By the way, chapter 16 talks about the manna. Now, I know that the standard view is that Moses wrote the Torah from Genesis 1 through Deuteronomy 34:12. Some people admit maybe not quite all. There's a few things that they'll say Joshua or someone else wrote. Only if you press them on difficulties in the text. So you listen to this and tell me who you think wrote this. Exodus 16, verse 31. And the house of Israel called the name thereof manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And Moses said, This is the thing which Jehovah has commanded. Let an omerful of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread wherewith I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. And Moses said unto Aaron, Take a pot, and put an omerful of manna therein, and lay it up before Jehovah to be kept throughout your generations. As Jehovah commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel did eat the manna 40 years until they came to the land inhabited. They did eat the manna until they came unto the borders of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is the 10th part of an ephah. And ladies and gentlemen, that was not written by Moses or in his time. The reason we know that is because it's talking about how they ate it for 40 years. This is Exodus 16. They're in year number 2. They hadn't even made it to HOREB yet, right? So it's looking at a time later. I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying that it's written out of place. It's a later writer telling us this. And so when we read texts like this, we have to say, okay, so there have been some interpolations, there have been some edits, there have been some things which have been added to the text by later writers, and maybe with good intention. But we have to recognize such things. Whenever we go into these texts, it's not enough anymore to be a fundamentalist who just blindly says, you know, I believe that this goes back to the pen of Moses. We're looking for that. We're looking for the authentic, ancient pieces that Moses actually wrote. We're looking for the Torah that God gave to Moses. Ladies and gentlemen, we have passed, according to the chronology that we're following in our cycle, we've passed through the sea, and now we're headed to HOREB. But on our way, we're going to stop and do a Zoom call together. So here's what I want you to know. If you're part of our Yachad, thank you for supporting and making all of this possible for the world to view free. You're going to be with me in a Zoom call. If you want to join the Yachad and be part of this in the future, feel free to do that. But I'm looking forward to our conversation. The rest of you can watch on YouTube. We do this every week for about 45 minutes to an hour. I also want to remind you that we just dropped a video this morning. I highly encourage that you see it. It gets into some of these matters of authorship. And so I want you to watch the video that we released today. So meet me in the Zoom. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Next week, we're going to HOREB. Join me.